Okay. All right, we are live now here in our Facebook group, Move Fully Nourished. Want to welcome a very special guest to our Move Fully Nourished team today. We've got Dr. Connor LaValle of Greater Good Chiropractic Care. I have worked with Connor for over a year now myself and have referred many clients to see him because he's just one of a kind, and in his specialty, he can explain a little bit more about what he does. But our topic today is going to be talking really about chiropractic health, health from a neurological perspective, the science, the philosophy, the art, and how the heck this relates to nutrition. So thank you so much for joining today, Dr. Connor.
Absolutely, Ashley. Thank you so much for asking me and having me here. You've just been such a phenomenal inspiration too with your group here, just constantly getting content out here to allow people to be empowered to change the direction of their health, which is our number one asset in life. And I think a lot of people, including myself, sometimes we can forget about that, but to come back and to have a like-minded scenario to where we can educate and empower people, it's phenomenal. So thank you for letting me be a part of that, Ashley.
Of course. Thank you. So tell us a little bit, Dr. Connor, about really what you do on a day-to-day basis, kind of before we get into our topic today, because I know we've got some great topics we're going to cover. But tell us a little bit about what your day in and day out looks like when you're working with your patients.
Excellent question, too. And there's a lot of different modalities and views when it comes to chiropractic care and what it means to actually achieve health and correction from our perspective. I want to talk a little bit about what we do in the office and how it relates to everyone's nervous system and their health. You heard that word. It's the N word, nervous system, right? And we know that that's a really critical organ in our system because it governs and controls every function in our body. So the reason why the spine is so critical is because we know it's an extension of the brain. So each time that we adjust the spine, we're actually affecting the brain. And that's what I tell people on their first initial visit. So we know that the autonomic nervous system, it's a phenomenal thing that God, the universe, whatever you believe within you, has provided us. And that's got two specific parts. One of them is the parasympathetic nervous system, which is that rest and digest, that reproductive, that calming system that allows us to heal and be well. And the opposite end of that spectrum is the sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight mode. There's a lot of research going on that says people who are more masculine or men are more fight or flight, and women are more tend and befriend. But either way, if you're feminine or you're a woman or you're a man, doesn't really matter. It's that system that allows us to get away from an immediate threat, but it doesn't allow us to repair. And in the 21st century, this is really becoming critical because being in that sympathetic mode, we're not adapting to our environment as well. And we're all living in that fight or flight mode on a continual basis. So if I look at it from a fundamental perspective, when it comes to chiropractic, I always say the number one thing that we're battling against is chronic stress. Getting out of that chronic sympathetic state, that aspect of the autonomic nervous system, and trying to balance things so that we can function the way that we were designed to, which was to reproduce. The number one reason we've evolved is to go through and procreate in our species. One of the other reasons, and we're going to get to this in a little bit actually, about reproduction and when it comes to fertility issues, it's been a huge hot topic today, especially in medicine and healthcare. The reason why we're having such problems in procreating and these fundamental things that we think should take place just naturally is because we're in such a chronic state. We're in such a chronically stressed state, and we're not being able to get out of that and adapt and balance the part of the autonomic nervous system. What we want to do is be able to balance the system, first and foremost. So chiropractic care should be about analyzing the spine in terms of a functional standpoint, not just the structure, which is a direct reflection of the brain, but how is it moving and how is it adapting? So I can go into that a little bit more, but does that make sense?
Yeah, very, very well said. So how we're going to then tie this also into being related to nutrition here is when you start talking a little bit more about alignment and really why it's important to make sure that your spine is in alignment, how that impacts the transition of nutrients throughout your body and transference between cells, organs, tissues, mitochondria, the energy house, powerhouse of your cell. So all of that is going to be crucial and very, very important when we're talking about making sure that the alignment is there, because I always talk about how you have 60 liters of blood that is pumped throughout your your body every single hour. And if that blood is not able to get to the spaces it needs to go, or it's full of gunk and junk, then either way, we're not getting to that optimizing space where we can really get to the highest level of function for our bodies. So go into a little bit more, tell us, Dr. Connor, about the traumas and toxins and the other topic when we wanted to talk about this first topic that we have on deck here.
Beautifully said, Ashley, and that's so critical to understand. Everything that I'm going to talk about today is going to be related to the chiropractic adjustment and what that means. Ashley is so phenomenal at correcting biochemical imbalances that relate to a lot of the topics that I'm going to go over. But from a structural, neurological, functional perspective is what I'm going to zero in on right now. So I'm so glad you asked that, Ashley. The coolest thing to think about, anytime we make a adjustment or we go to a specific area, what I think about is my mentor, who is Dr. Vern Pierce, and he was one of the giants in our profession that made it an absolute point to stay up with the latest technology in our profession so we can analyze the motion of the spine, which then tells us how are you adapting, how are you changing, and how are you able to take in those signals from your environment and make them work for you. And that's the same thing that nutrition does. But let me kind of back up here. So thoughts, traumas, toxins, and physical distortions are some of the main issues that bring about problems in the spine. And the way that I look at that, if you guys can think about it, this is a really unique term, but it's called subluxation, which is a minor dislocation in the spine that causes a neurological imbalance. The same thing happens when you're having chronic stress in the GI system. It creates distortion and a lockdown of that fight or flight mode that stops your body from adapting and functioning the way that it was intended to. So what we do fundamentally is link up the electrical system, your nervous system, to the chemical messenger, which is your hormone system. What's so interesting is that your hormones are governing, controlling your behaviors and the way that you feel. So I always talk about in my practice, I don't really care as much about how you feel as much as about how you function, because feeling follows function. So the hypothalamus, we've all heard of that, right? It's the massive part of the brain that allows us to maintain homeostasis, maintain balance, and regulate itself. The problem with that is that it's kind of mechanistic. It's static. It's almost like a balance beam if we're affecting the hypothalamus. What the brain really is all about is creating a balance of neurotransmitters as well as hormones within the brain. And by locating specifically where those distortions are in the spine, allowing the spine to move again properly, you're affecting the hormones in the blood. What are those hormones that are constantly within that fight or flight mode of the sympathetic nervous system? It's adrenaline and cortisol.
Endocrine,
right?
Cortisol, epinephrine,
Yes. I heard you talk about that too, Ashley, on some of your webinars. I got really excited when you asked me to come on because I wanted to kind of add a little layer to that. We see people come into our office who are constantly, shut down. They're in this constant, forward motion. Some of that's being on their computer all day long or looking down at their phone or having those rounded shoulders, which then changes the structure of their spine. And your posture and your spine is a direct reflection of what your brain is doing. But here's what's so cool. When cortisol and adrenaline are chronically elevated, we know that there is a disease state that's setting in. And one of the things we can do is balance the hypothalamus, but not just by doing it from a static standpoint, by correcting it on a hormonal level. So the ends of your neurons, again, the brain we're affecting every time we make a specific adjustment, they're not just sending chemical messages here and there in their electrical signals. They're literally transferring information that tells your brain to balance itself when it's necessary, and it's dictating your behavior. So when you're
Connor,
stuck,
I always talk about, sorry to interrupt you, I always talk about with my clients, your thoughts become your hormones. Your hormones then listen in. They're like eavesdropping on your thoughts. And what you just said is so clearly put, and creating that symbolism there is, it matters, the amount of stress that we have in our body. It makes a difference. The amount of times we meditate and we relax and we focus on deep breathing activities, because it's going to change the hormonal communication between the brain and the body.
That's absolutely spot on. And that's why I think it's really helpful to kind of pay attention. I would say these three different things are what you should focus on when it comes your health from a fundamental standpoint without adding anything in. And what do I mean by adding anything in? The standard of care is usually adding medication in order to mitigate a symptom, or a surgery in order to take back a situation in your body that's been going on for several decades and try to bring it back to center. But it's all about trying to stop what is causing the issue to which you came in with, rather than correcting the true cause of the problem. And that nutrition does the same thing. So when you're stuck, you're in a hyper adrenaline release response, and cortisol and adrenaline are constantly intermixed and tied. So when you talk about stress, it's the kickoff for most disease. So what I like to think about, Ashley, you probably heard this before, but the technical term is allostatic load. And let me kind of frame this. So all of us are juggling all these different things that we gotta maintain balance on. So if we have our kids are having problems in school, we have a bad relationship, we're not communicating with our spouse as well. Our car died this morning, we got to call the repair guy before we go off to work. All these things are creating extra stress on top of what we've already had a baseline of just being human. It's hard to be human, especially in 2020, right? So it's fundamental when we think of, hey, what's causing the issues that's not allowing the body to heal and adapt? We can go after those. When all those things start to happen, it's like juggling 17 tennis balls. If I think of all those things that are causing us stress, what happens if I throw you that last tennis ball, that 18th? The thing is, you don't drop that last tennis ball, you drop everything. And that's when disease and illness sets in, when you can't handle the stress load anymore. One of the main aspects that cause that stress load to go over the edge, which is your allostatic load from a scientific standpoint, is being subluxated. And again, that's that interesting word that I brought up before. So there's minor misalignments in the spine, stopping that nerve impulse from getting to that specific organ or that specific muscle, or getting to the brain and stopping it from adapting the way that it's supposed to. And that's a real fundamental aspect of health. What we do is pay specific attention to how the spine is not just looking from a structural standpoint, but how is it moving? That's telling me, how is your stress response able to be affected when those extra things come about? And that's your real relationship to illness and disease. Because at the same time, neurological interference is setting itself into your system, and you're chronically stressed and hyper on call, if you will, for all those extra things I just mentioned, you're in a place of non-adaptation. So we want to make sure to pinpoint and correct those issues. We take it from an objective standpoint.
And what I think is so important and crucial to point out here too is how different you are in terms of chiropractors and the practice and what you preach and the methodology that you use when you are practicing and helping people. Because I myself had seen 3 other chiropractors before I came to see you. And every other person was just making simple, same things, same adjustments, where it'd be like, and you're done. It's the same for everybody. Whereas you're talking about measuring, assessing, viewing the progress, looking before, looking after, and to really make sure that the changes that you're making are producing results.
Yes. So that's interesting too. One of the things I talked about was Dr. Vern Pierce, who I learned from. His biggest thing was standing up with the latest technology. And he always said that chiropractors should be, if we are striving to move the profession forward and make sure that we're doing what we say we're doing, we should be on the same level as neurosurgeons. Because if you're affecting the spine and correcting without adding anything, which would be like a scalpel or adding a medication, we're literally changing that impulse to the brain and how you're behaving as a result. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. We take out the guesswork, just like Ashley said. By anyone who comes in, I want to communicate why I'm going to do it, what we're going to do, and what you should expect. And that's where the technology comes in. We'll share screens if we're capable of doing that in a moment. Is that cool, Ashley?
I'll work on that while you're talking.
If not, no big deal. I'll just describe it. Okay. So short-term stress is good. Long-term, the release will literally kill you over time. And that's because it's constantly eroding your ability to adapt. So there's 2 things. When you're chronically stressed, what happens? All your blood rushes to your muscles, to your heart, to your brain. And when we're in this chronically stressed state, especially in 2020, 2021, 21st century, constantly having all these demands upon us, especially these young moms are probably some of the major demographic that we see on a regular basis of all these things. It's almost like a superhuman demand on your time and your energy. Being in that chronically stressed state is going to take all that blood from your muscles, your heart, and your brain. It's gonna keep it there. And instead, what we should have that blood be able to disperse, because we only have so much in our body. That blood should be going to your reproductive organs. It should be going to your digestive system and to your immune system. So when that blood is shuttled away to your muscles because you're stressed out, you're not getting that proper healing fluid to allow your body to adapt. So it's funny, in our practice, we see a ton of women who can't have children, and they got infertility issues. And the average woman will, and the average couple will spend $100,000 in vitro fertilization protocols in order to get just to have a child, which is something that should be so natural. And it's not like we're connecting their nervous system to that part of the uterus that allows things to start to work properly, but we're down-regulating that adrenaline and cortisol response in so many of these cases. So adaptation is critical, and taking blood from where it doesn't belong and putting it to where it does belong. And that's that balance of the autonomic nervous system. Does that make sense, Ashley? Am I saying that?
Yeah, perfectly. Very, very well said. And actually really relatable. I have some definitely people in this group who that will resonate very, very clearly with.
So it's a kind of it's a shuttling from, hey, oh my God, I got 10,000 things to do today. I got to take off my to-do list. I got to go drop this thing off at the bank, at the mail, and somebody's always trying to gain your attention. You're taking that blood flow from your uterus, from your digestive system, which is where your immune system is. You're stopping those natural processes, keeping you away from handling pathogenic viruses and bacteria, and you're putting it towards these parts of your body that are designed to be a good thing, to run from the tiger, or run from the threat that's immediately in front of you. That's a good thing. But when it's chronically elevated, which is what a lot of us are experiencing, that's when the real disease kicks in. And whenever we look at the spine, there's two ways in which it can create a real problem, and that's a physical distortion. And actually, you asked me about this time of year. A lot of people will come into our office after shoveling the driveway, and all of a sudden they throw their back out, and they're like, "Oh man, all I did was pick up this last pile of snow and to get my car out here so we can all be safe." And I'm always thinking to myself, this has been building up over and over and over time because of those chronic stressors that have set in. And that's that allostatic load. It was that last tennis ball that I threw you that you stopped and it dropped, and everything tends to fall apart. And that's a physical distortion. The chemical distortion from having problems in your spine create long-term inflammation, which those two aspects of disease, chronic disease, which is a major problem in our country, are inflammation and stress. And those are really tied hand in hand. So it's not just physical and structural. People come to us all the time, say, I got back pain, I got neck pain, I got headaches. I always tell them that's the most fundamental issues that we deal with. It's rather easy to correct those, but I'm not even focused on that. We're focused on correcting your stress response, because as a natural result, those things will get better by correcting the function of your spine. And Ashley, if you've been a patient in our office, it's easy to understand that, but you can kind of see when we're being that specific and objective with our corrections and allowing those specific nerves to heal and go to the places that they were designed, everything is a chance getting better without needing to add anything to it, like a scalpel, like medication. There's time and place for those things, but it's not the first response.
Right. The more we can get rid of that, and the more we can just naturally let the body heal, and like you said, do what it's naturally intended to do, the better off we'll be without having to, because a lot of medications will wreak havoc on the gut. So if we can get you in a place where you don't have to use any of those medications, or you don't have to consistently use them for the rest of your life, we're putting your body in a state of heightened immune system, because then you're not being compromised. Your gut isn't being compromised. In other ways too. I was able, Connor, to do a screen share. So on the bottom, if you go when you need it, there's a little button that says just the screen share spot. You can do it.
Beautiful. Awesome. Super easy, Ashley. I'll go to that in a moment here, and I'm just going to comment on what you just said, okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Because it's huge too. There's two hormones I want to talk about. And when I talked about before, I mentioned the reason we adjust the spine or correct the spine for proper motion. I'll leave it with 3 points here. Proper motion of the spine brings 90% of nutrition to the brain. When we think of nutrition from a neurological perspective, we're talking about two things: blood flow and cerebrospinal fluid. Those two fluids are what bathes the brain in the natural fundamental nutrition it needs to function the way it was optimally designed. So whenever we see a subluxation or misalignment, we want to pinpoint it, correct it, and allow the body to do what it was designed, as I said. The other thing about the subluxation is we know that the stress response can be overactive, and that is going to lead to even more issues that cause problems. Let's share the screen here soon. Before I'm doing that, there's two hormones. So the hippocampus is something that's involved in learning and memory. We see a lot of children in our office with ADHD, learning difficulties, even us as parents, us as young professionals. The hippocampus is a really interesting part in the spine and in the brain because it's responsible for learning and memory. So if you've ever been chronically stressed, it shuts down the frontal lobe in the brain and stops you from remembering what you needed to do that day. So if you've ever been driving home from work and remember that your spouse told you to pick up the groceries or to do the, put some salt on the driveway to down the ice that you forgot to shovel, whatever it is. I'm not saying that that's what's going on in my life, but that's a problem. That's your hippocampus. It's chronically stressed. So when your cortisol is getting released because you're chronically stressed, it literally damages the hippocampus and stops learning and memory from being able to set in. So downregulating that stress response is critical to not only maintain a proper relationship, but then also to remember and to record and to learn. And children with ADHD are in a chronically stressed sympathetic state, and they're not able to adapt because that hippocampus is getting damaged from chronic cortisol release. The same thing is true for dopamine. What is that? That's a hormone, that's a neurotransmitter. It's what our electrical system of our nervous system is attached to by allowing that chemical messenger to do what it was designed in terms of the behavior. I keep coming back to that because it's critical. So dopamine allows us to feel good. It allows us to know that we're doing a good job in life. It's a phenomenal hormone. When it's downregulated, a lot of us feel terrible. We don't feel good. We don't know why. And the big problem with not having enough dopamine is because cortisol, when it's chronically elevated, actually damages the receptors that allow dopamine to do what it was designed to do. So depression can set in. Other issues relating to psychotropic problems and mental health, it's critical and it matters. And it's all tied to chronic cortisol release. So those two hormones are directly, specifically attached to chiropractic in your spine. And people never think about that. All the science has been coming out the last couple decades, and it's been showing that that's definitive. So I wanted to put that out there too. Mental health matters.
Yeah, such an important point, especially when, I think everybody can relate to that on some level. And when you even just think about it from a surface perspective, is that, oh, okay, yeah, I'm stressed and I just feel like, oh, I'm having brain fog, and I'll hear that all the time. And I'm then relaying that message back to the person saying, hey, this is something to pay attention to. This is a little bit more serious. It's not just, oh, I'm forgetful, or I just, had a lot of stress in my life and, oh, things are just this way. Those are things that if they're chronic and they're occurring over a long period of time in your life, they can have some serious and significant consequences in your body. But we're here to say that we can reverse it. We can do things to help you heal, and we'll get to those points today too. So don't feel like we're all doom and gloom here today. We're going to get to the point where we're talking about what you can do to help your body heal.
That's a huge point too. Zero doom and gloom, because the potential your body has to heal on its own when interference is removed and you do it in an objective, specific way, it's unbelievable what's possible. And a lot of people don't know that until they experience it, right? And it's done through a biochemical, nutrition is absolutely critical to that perspective, and also spinal correction. I think there's so many things that we can meet on here, and they overlap. We could talk for 3 more hours. Part of our challenge here is to bring it to the center here and say, what can we get across in 30 to 45 minutes that's going to be most action-oriented and most impactful. Adjustments, even if I was non-specific and I adjusted the spine on a regular basis, the research now has actually come out and showed that adjustments themselves, even if they're non-specific, can reduce cortisol, increase dopamine, increase your body's ability to adapt and heal, lower adrenaline, lower cortisol. And we think of the inflammatory response being the governing control center for all chronic disease, then we know that if we can reduce stress, we can reduce inflammation. The problem is the number one, you guys might have heard of this before, but the number one sign that people get when they have a heart attack is unfortunately death. It's the thing that just takes you out. You don't get any warning signs. What we do in our office is measure the sympathetic and autonomic nervous system at a direct standpoint so that we can objectify what's going on and get ahead of the problem. And that's where things like thermography come in, which is the gold standard for measuring the spine and the nervous system's ability to adapt. Motion of the spine is critical because, like I said before, 90% of nutrition to the brain comes from proper motion of the spine. So I said when I was opening my practice, how do we see the spine in motion? Well, it's done through video fluoroscopy, which is a very low radiation video motion x-ray that allows us to pinpoint where the problems are, or the subluxations that are stopping your brain from releasing the proper hormones and allowing you not to adapt in the way that you feel and allow you to express the health that you were designed to do. Mm-hmm. And we put those two together, and then everybody wins. The patient gets better, I feel more confident, I sleep better at night, and it's back to my mentor, Dr. Pierce, his whole view of the profession, staying up with the latest technology.
I thought that was one of the coolest things in the first visit that I had with you, and being able to actually see my body in motion. What is my spine doing as I'm folding forward, as I'm lifting my chin? What's happening to my neck? And my chronic, neck pain over and over, and just seeing what wasn't moving. And then now to see how things have improved so greatly to the point where, like I love the quote that you said before. I'm going to quote you about your brain bathing in your body's nutrients coming from the blood that's being delivered. And when you have interference here or a subluxation, as you're mentioning, that's a very important spot in your body to make sure that there isn't that subluxation happening. So to see those real-time motion x-rays and scans that you do in your office it's unbelievable. And if you've never experienced this before and you're working with someone who doesn't assess, who doesn't look at your body and measure what's going on a regular basis, maybe it's time to make a switch.
Yeah, and beautiful. And thank you for saying so. I appreciate that. I always try to just kind of step back and remain ultimately humble as possible when it comes to this, because we're all kind of products of what we've learned and who we've interacted with in our life. Everybody shows up for a reason at the right time, and I just met the right mentors and had a huge experience in my own life when I was training for bodybuilding competitions when I was an undergrad, completely focused on those type of goals, and had a massive injury and had surgeries done to correct what they called deviated septum in my nose, had 3 different nose sprays in order to clear up what was going on. I couldn't take a deep breath for 6 months. And I finally met a doc who was a chiropractor, and it absolutely blew my mind because they just said, hey, let's see what's going on in your nervous system. Let's see what's going on with your spine, and let's not be non-specific about it. Let's objectify it. And they put me under fluoro, found that I had a massive T1 subluxation or misalignment when I came back in extension, because I would put the bar right here as I was squatting 3 times a week. I'm 4, I can't, my legs were super skinny. If I was ever going to stand on a bodybuilding stage, I'd have to bring those up. The problem is squatting 3 times a week creates massive issues in that upper thoracic spine. So he adjusted me once. I got up off the table and had my first deep breath in 6 months after getting surgery and having 3 nose sprays. And I'm like, that's that medical model that's there for a specific reason, and it's phenomenal for certain cases, but from a health standpoint and progressive and preventive standpoint, it's not doing its full job, and there's statistics behind that. But that changed my life because they got down to the root cause of the issue, which was those nerves being shut off, my brain not communicating with my lungs, my rest of my body. And that's what creates that chronic stress. So that's when I decided to change that whole trajectory of my life and go towards the neurological perspective. And then how does that relate to the gut? And how does that relate to your stress response? That's another
Yeah.
question that we should probably delve into on second filming of this, if we could.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
I'm always putting that
Chapter
another
2.
part.
No,
So
well,
why don't we
first
share
I
the
just want
screen?
to,
Yeah,
first really quick before you go there, I just want to say that's an amazing story and something really, I hear a lot. People talk about seasonal allergies. Oh, Ashley, I feel like I have allergies all the time. This is not something to ignore. You could have a subluxation in the upper part of your thoracic spine. You could have an imbalance in your gut. I talk about this too with the nutrition and the food that you're consuming can actually be a food intolerance that maybe by dairy or by gluten, and you have a constant sniffle or a constant nose drip and you just think it's allergies, and it might not be that. So that was just a great example that you just, and actually I didn't know the depths of that story, so I'm glad you shared that. That was a great example to even just say that it may not be the back pain from shoveling. It may not be the neck pain that you're experiencing. It may not be other issues that seem very apparent or obvious to you. It could be other things like, hey, I'm just having some discomfort in my lower GI, or I'm having cramps, or just the discomfort, or I'm having seasonal allergies that could actually mean something more, where you can actually have a solution to this problem.
Yeah, it's spot on. And people, we just weren't educated in this way. So it's like you have to experience it and you have to go through it. And without getting into all those discussions as to how we don't know about these things, hey, let's just enjoy and go forth with the new information that we've gleaned. And that's absolutely critical. And you're right, it's all tied to the nervous system. I'm going to go ahead and screen share with you, Ashley. Yep. I'm going to do that here. Can you guys see this?
Yep, we can see it perfectly. So if you want to actually go on and make it full screen for us, and we can see just your slide.
Awesome. Great. Okay. I'm just going to go over a couple quick slides here. This is the talk I sometimes give, but I'm just going to go over this real quick here. So the problem with chiropractic and what you might have heard before, or what kind of might be incongruent in your mind, that there is no real standard of care when it comes to our profession. So I like to use this slide as an example. What's nice about medicine is that there is a standard of care. So if some patient comes in with a heart problem, we know that same patient is going to go to 10 cardiologists. They're going to have the same 3 diagnostic tests that are modern, the most up-to-date in technology, and they're going to have the same treatment given, and those same results are going to be predictable and they're going to be achieved. Missing in our profession here is that you take that same patient, you go to 10 different chiropractors, you have 10 different analyses and tests. Some of those will be from 1895 when the profession started. Some of them will be new, but you're going to have 10 different specific opinions about where those subluxations are, and then 10 different adjustments. And the problem is you're going to get different results, and then there's a lack of clarity. And then we can't share that information between professions. What we like to do is objectify those findings and allow us to be able to create a foundation of science so that anything we send is going to be 100% understood and then applied in a specific manner so that we can all communicate in terms of our profession. So this left side here is a normal cervical spine. Again, the reason the cervical spine is so critical to your overall health is because that's what governs and controls that direct communication to the brain. It's that closest area that allows your nervous system to give that blood flow and cerebral spinal fluid up to the brain and down through the sacrum and all the way out to your feet. This individual on the right came into us. He was our first personal injury case. He had been rear-ended by a school bus, and entire life since then had been frankly in shambles. Had to take medications just to go to sleep. He had to, he was drinking alcohol, was having, opiates, and, was prescribed for the pain, couldn't lift his left arm. Terrible situation, father of 4. You can see in the upper cervical spine there, I'm going to go back, I'm sorry. He had a reversal. And normally, as you can see on the image on the right, you should have what's called a lordotic curve going towards the nose. And that angle up there, that 7.9 degrees, should be somewhere between 18 and 24 degrees. Mm-hmm. Tells us that brain stem is getting the proper blood flow it needs in order to regulate those hormones that we discussed before. So I'm going to come back to that, but thermography is something else that is the gold standard of saying, hey, how is that spine communicating with the brain? And that image on the right with those really deep blue colors up top and those deep red colors in the middle shows that the nervous system's under a tremendous amount of stress, and those bones are shifted out of alignment, causing pressure and irritation on those nerves. And that image on the right, it's a thermography of checking for breast cancer. It's now a massively used non-invasive aspect of checking if there's any pathological process going on in the reproductive tissue, in women's breast tissue. And that's the first place it started, because women were looking for an alternative to mammograms. You can see there's a breast cancer forming because of that really heated up spot. Just like a PET scan, it's showing if there's glucose being taken up. That's showing if there's a pathological cell that's multiplying, and it's non-invasive. We try to do this, well, actually we do in our office every single visit to know if we're making a change for the better from a whole health perspective, and not just trying to take away pain, because that is so topical. But that's an example. The image on the left shows we did one adjustment up top on that real bad reversal I was mentioning on this previous slide here, where that arrow is. And this was the result. It was a couple adjustments. It's only a month later, and he has a perfect correction of his cervical spine if you look back here. That's the kickstart of allowing that brain to get the communication it needs to regulate itself. You talk about a short-term correction, that's about bringing the technology in and taking the guesswork out of what we're doing. And if the brain is the most important organ in the body that's telling us how we feel and function, we got to pay extra special close attention to the spine to know how that's functioning, because that's giving a direct communication to the brain. This is
Connor,
a similar... Yep.
Sorry, Connor, go back real quick. That's amazing. If you can look at those dates really quickly at the bottom, you're not even talking a full month here. This is just within, 3 weeks. This is amazing.
Yep. Yeah. And thanks for saying so, Ashley. I mean, I wish our profession too, we do a great job. The reason our profession is the #1 alternative healthcare option for people out there is because we get results. What I wish we could do a little bit better was prove it. And there's 3 questions I always wish that healthcare providers could answer and also ask is, where's the problem? #1. #2, can you correct it clinically? Are you able to? Do you have the training? And then #3, can you prove it was corrected? Because in my opinion, that's everything. And that's what our patients should be demanding from our healthcare providers, whether it's blood work, whether it's a outcome assessment on your ability to move and function, or is it your nervous system in your spine? So this is just an example of that, and I humbly need to accept that and know that their body's changing when we provide the right input to remove that interference. So,
and one more thing too here, Connor, and I know, because I know you very well as an incredibly honest person, but even for the people who are watching and don't know you, to look at this, you can see this is not made up, right? You can see this is the exact same person. Look at the teeth. The cavities are the same. The Adam's apple is the same. This is the same person. And then just the value in knowing that short 3 weeks that you can have that much correction and that much of a result is so powerful. So again, just wanted to point that out.
Thanks for saying so, Ashley. Yeah, and it's so cool. That's what I love to do on a regular basis, is just show people exactly what's going on with them and then prove what we do by communicating. And communication is everything. Communication and connection, but we build it all on, and what healthcare should be about, because it is your greatest asset. We only get one body. We only get one brain. Every decision we make either brings us further or kind of takes away our health. And there's a few different ways to go about it, but I'm going to stay in my lane here. This is one other example I want to show here. This was a young cheerleader that we see in our office. She's 13 years old, heavily involved in cheerleading, gymnastics, came in with blurry vision on a constant basis, had neck pain, stiffness, headaches, upper cervical pain and back pains, and coccyx pain because she's constantly being thrown up in the air and has been falling and hasn't been sleeping. The middle aspect is another example of the thermography that we do. And her pelvis here on the left, what I'm looking at is saying, how are these lumbar vertebrae moving? We know that those vertebrae are directly affecting the reproductive organs and the digestive system, and also governing, controlling how her neck is moving while she's moving through space. 3 office visits, and she's a teenager, and the younger you are, the quicker the results we get. But when I sat down with her mom and we went through her history, we found out she was a C-section birth and had both her tonsils and adenoids removed. And also her first two scans were really blown out, which is showing her nervous system's under a tremendous amount of stress from birth, but also in the demands that she's putting on her body on a regular basis. This was a 2-adjustment correction on the right side, and you can see there's so much more symmetry. On the left, her tailbone's being shoved over to the right, which is putting tremendous amount of stress on those lumbar vertebrae and where those nerves are going to regulate her digestive system, and then stop that communication to the brain. So that's those headaches. And this was the post scan where we see that line start to straighten out. And again, I show this to say the pelvis and the cervical spine are critical for allowing that electrical system to communicate with your chemical messenger, which regulates your hormones and how you feel. And if you've ever been a patient, you know that I always say, I want to, number one, know how are you functioning, and then how are you feeling as a result. And it makes perfect biological plausibility that when your nervous system is moving and adapting accordingly, those hormones get released properly at the right time to allow you to heal, not just for the short term, but create the most longevity in your life. But then what's most important is your health span, or how much vitality and how much joy and fulfillment you experience in your life until you get to the end. Unfortunately, right now in our society, we spend most of our life savings toward this very couple years at the end of our life. It really isn't set up to nurture health and to give you that vitality that we should all seek and expect from our one life that we have. So there's a prevention aspect, there's a support of what the body needs in order to fully maintain and correct itself. And that's what we got to work on every day. And this is another example. We see several chiropractors in our office. Actually, this was a chiropractor from Palatine who's been coming in a couple times a month. And this was him on the left. He'd been specifically non-adjusted most of his life in school, had terrible neck pain, low back pain, and attention deficit disorders and migraine headaches. And on the right side, all those things started to dissipate and go down, especially the pain aspect. That's the fundamental stuff. Just from 2 adjustments. And we see his atlas angles up to normal. He's got that normal curve in his neck. And I just show it to say, we take out the guesswork. I'm just going to show this one last thing. This is a little tiny example of the fluoroscopy. We can see it move. We can pinpoint where the problem is. And if I'm going to put my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather who's got end-stage dementia, who I've adjusted down on the table, I want to know specifically that we're not guessing, and we're only going to affect those areas that need to be adjusted so that you live the highest expression of your life, and then also bring that lifespan and health span to its highest degree for our genetic potential. And this is a tiny little excerpt from a longer presentation I give, but I wanted just to show a couple of those just so you guys get what I was saying before.
That's awesome, Connor. How is that in the image that's on the screen right now? What is going on in that neck specifically? Lack of motion in the like C2?
So anytime that I'm looking at a specific motion, I'm always looking for a couple things in the spine. And you can see that very upper part is the skull, and it's coming down on that funny looking thing that's jutting out to the back. That's the C1 vertebra, and then C2 is the biggest vertebra on the spine. So normally when you bring your head back in extension, those 3 should be touching. Those should be coming down. And if C2 is staying put and you're not getting any contact from C1, we know that there's a movement distortion, a physical distortion, and then a chemical issue there. So I would adjust occiput, which is the very top bone of the skull, which gives a complete, whenever you have an occiput problem, it causes issues a lot of times all the way down the chain. So the things I was talking about before, headaches, digestive issues, lack of communication with the brain and the gut from an immunological standpoint, actually, believe it or not, starts in that upper cervical region. So you give the bodies the most potential to adapt and heal when you correct that. So this was a C2 and extension adjustment we did. Her name was Rachel. This actually did this in clinic. And within 2 weeks and 2 adjustments, all the things she came in with were corrected without adding anything else. And I think that's the key. You know, no added chemicals, no added surgeries, just correcting the body and allowing it to heal the way it was designed. But with this specific little clip I took, that's what we're looking at.
Amazing. Now, another thing real quick, you have time, Connor?
I do, yes.
Okay, so
I have staff coming in right now, but we're doing it.
just real quick here. So another thing that would be a most common question that I hear is, well, how often do I need to be seen? You know, is this going to be, I've seen a chiropractor before and they make me come in 3 times a week and I have to go for 6 months straight, 3 times a week. One of my past experiences, and I was like, this is crazy. Who has time for this? So can you just talk real quick to, I know everybody's going to be slightly different, but just talk to how you determine that for people.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the thing about it is, if I'm going to go anywhere for 3 times a week, I better have a really good reason as to why. And if that's the case, I haven't seen anybody 3 times a week. There's a few, you know, most people come in twice a week for a couple weeks in order to get that first initial correction. We usually expect about 60 to 80% correction in those first 6 visits. And then I want to see how you're doing. So the whole point is to objectify and be very specific about clinically, where can I get you to correction as efficiently as possible? And that just is where the technology comes in. It allows me to communicate and say, you only need this many visits as a minimum to correct things for the long term. I don't care about getting a quick fix, because that is so short-lived. And you end up spending more time, more money, more headaches by doing aspirin chiropractic, where it's a quick fix every now and then, and it's an arbitrary set of recommendations. So what I'd rather do, take everything into account in terms of your history, how old you are, what you're coming in with, what your main complaints are, put it all together. And we know through dozens and dozens, hundreds of case studies ultimately about how the spine is going to react and adapt. And then we know that you're busy, so we keep that to the minimum. And most people actually get a much better result from less care, but done in the right way, at the right bone, at the right time, rather than trying to guess because we don't have any imaging or know really what's going on. So that's kind of a wordy philosophical way of saying that being more efficient allows less demand on your schedule and more efficient correction for the long term. And everybody's different, like you said, but have technology, you can actually communicate it from a scientific perspective about what you need to get the outcome we're looking for.
Awesome. And just another great point to really wrap up everything that we've talked about today. If you're experiencing any of the symptoms that even Dr. Connor talked about today, or you and I are working one-on-one, where we're really trying to resolve your gut issues, and we've been putting in the time and making those changes and to get an even greater level of results, and you've been seen before maybe in the past, but you haven't had this level of detail of care and treatment, this is a great chance to really reach out. And Connor, I'm going to put your information within this video, so they'll be able to get to see your website link, and any other information you'd like me to share, I'll put that up there. So you can reach out to Dr. Connor, reach out to the office, schedule your appointment, and really get you started on living your best and your longest and most vibrant life today. And that's what's most important from a health perspective. So thanks so much for joining. This has been really, really great, very informative, educational here, and always a pleasure to have you up here.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Seriously, really appreciate you asking me to come on, and it means a ton coming from you. Thank you for being a resource for our patients as well. I know we could talk for 3 more hours about the gut and what it means from a nutritional standpoint and how critical your biochemical health and your adaptation is. Maybe round 2, but really appreciate that. And let me know if I can do anything else for you guys. But keep rocking, Ashley. Proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And then if anybody has any questions, you can post them within this post. Dr. Connor is in this group, so he can see and respond if you tag him in it, Connor LaValle. And then I can also make sure the questions get to you as well, Connor. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a great rest of your Tuesday, and thanks for joining.
Here, guys. Thank you, Ashley. Have a great day.